Hello everyone, welcome to my oil painting class. And today we're exploring how to paint foggy, wintry landscape, traditional British landscape of the British countryside, country lane, with some beautiful orange kind of coppery ferns and that fog descending on us. So we'll be using a sponge, and you might need a wider container to dip your sponge in. I even got a little dish, and we'll see how we'll get on with that. We'll also need a spare paper for color mixing. We'll explore some of our darks and some of our browns, oranges, and maybe one or two different surfaces. Doesn't matter what prime they are, what color they are, maybe paper. So we can explore the strokes we can do with a sponge, and just to get going, get familiar with the new tool to paint with. And then again, I have my filbert brushes, range of them, possibly a wooden wedge if you wanted to do some scratches for branches later on. And my surface today is I mixed some white, crimson and violet, and we need it, doesn't matter if it will be light or dark or slightly different variation of that color mixture. I primed it with acrylic, and I want to see how thinner layers we'll be using with a sponge will allow us to see that background color. Okay, so let's just leave this image here. Let's put these boards aside for the moment, and let's start with a little bit of color mixing. Now on my palette I have some white, Payne's gray, or any other black. I have a range of warm colors, any you've got. I squeezed out some cadmium yellow, ochre, cadmium orange, or it could have been cadmium red or both, crimson, magenta, and some violet. And from the cool colors, I mainly have got two. I have ultramarine, so that's much more close blue to the violet. Okay, just got some paint on my brush. And I have some emerald green, and I'm interested in using those two colors for making some of the darks. I also have got some bluey gray, but not all of you might have it, so don't worry about it. We can easily mix it by using white, dab of gray, and ultramarine, so that's all here. So we have a lot of shadows on our painting today, and I don't really want to end up with a lot of blacks. Yes, there will be loads of dark tones, but it don't have to be as dark as they're on a photograph. Just constantly remember, our image in front of us is our inspiration, maybe for composition, maybe for the maybe in this case for the fog and kind of shapes of the trees, but doesn't have to remain very dark unless we decided to, and how your work turns out, and you'll be enjoying it. Okay, but I want to see that variety of color within the darks. Yes, there are some lovely coppery colors of the ferns, there's some reds, there are some also lovely oranges and sepias and magentas and other reds, hints of greens, there are hints of blues, and I want to see how we can introduce that, and even mixing some of the blacks. I'd love us to explore some of the color. Right, so let's get my oils out, oils, tubs. Today you can use either the oil mixtures or just tubs, whichever you prefer. Obviously, sometimes for the sponge, we need quite a lot of liquid. So if you don't have enough oils mixed, so just add some more tubs to it, it will be totally fine. Right, so let's mix a little bit of color. Now the warms will be staying mainly light, so I'm going to start with a little bit of white. Oh, I've got a tiny bit of green on my brush as well, as I was just spreading the color to show you what my paints look like. So a little bit of white and some cadmium yellow. Okay, might not have much of that color, but cadmium yellow and ochre with some white. That might be a good color to use. Okay. Just gonna mix just gently a couple of varieties here. Made into the same paint mixture, a dab of cadmium orange, only a little dab because it will become very powerful red very quickly. Okay, and that's where I'm going to stay a bit longer by kind of within those colors, within ochre and cadmium red. I'm just going to mix a little bit more darker versions where I can add more ochre and about the same cadmium red or cadmium orange. And maybe the maximum volume of ochre. Ochre doesn't get too dark, but if I add now more cadmium red, that will be quite nice. So it's not a fresh red, but it will be something in between red and ochre. Okay. I'm going to wipe my brush, and I want to go for a dab of white and some crimson. Now, crimson could be really exciting. Pink, yeah. So just using some white and crimson, that will give us a nice pink. Well, do it like that and zoom in. You might see it slightly bigger. Okay. And now I found it now, then you can see the rest of my colors here. That's it. Right, so now if I'll go for a bit more crimson. Okay, just going more concentrated crimson and less white. So that's just getting it darker altogether. And a combination of crimson with very little white and some of these lovely orangey reds will be fabulous. And then let's mix this crimson with a dab of ochre in it. It will soften that freshness of the pink in the red. We'll make it more opaque. So that's our quite that similar to coppery color, coppery red. Well, actually, might need more ochre in it to make it more coppery, but the combination again of these colors together will give us an impression of it. Okay, so nice and bold and fresh. If we look at some of the trees at the back, they're less fresh in color, but we still want to make them probably a little bit more, less grayish. So what about if we add a little bit more white to our cadmium red, sorry, crimson, crimson. So crimson, a bit of white, and a dab of violet. So now we're gonna go a little bit more into the cooler side, slightly darker side at the same time. That's quite a nice color. That's quite similar to my background. I'll add more white to it just to see what the actual pigment looks like without its darkness. So I'll be more happier to paint with something like this color rather than loads of grays. Let's have a dab of violet to it again. So we just mixed our yellows and oranges together. Then we explored what cadmium red can do with a bit of white or with a bit of ochre. And now we're just exploring what the cadmium red and violet can do. Okay, so just little variations again. A bit more violet, less red, and a little bit more white with it. And again, a bit more violet, so the quantity of red is getting smaller and smaller. So maybe those are going to be the colors for our trees at the back to get them more into the fog. So that's getting much more purpley. Again, just adding a bit more white to it so we can just see what's happening there. Okay. Right, so those are warm colors. We can also do some warm greens. So some of the leaves are still remaining on the trees, but they're kind of mucky. Well, some of them are of the colors we already mixed, and some of them got kind of a mucky green color. So what I'm proposing to do is to use a bit of ultramarine with some white, more ultramarine than that, otherwise it stays too pale. And a dab of ochre. So then it's not a fresh green, but it has that old wear and tear. Well, it's been, the leaves been there for long enough. And again, we can make it slightly more yellowy by adding more ochre, or slightly more even reddish, just adding a bit more extra ultramarine here. And I can add a dab of cadmium orange. Those would be quite nice colors of the old leaves. I can see some of these colors a bit more on the trees here. And again, I might just exaggerate that color a bit more stronger, yeah, than just a bit more of a duller color there. Those are going to be our warm colors. And we might not mix them as accurate from now on. We'll be just dabbing, okay, some more ochre or some more yellow. Oh, okay, let's get one of these reds or the other reds. It will give us an idea of what to mix. Okay. And the next colors I want us to work together are darks. If I'll use some cadmium red, so that's just my fresh cadmium red. Just spread it out a little bit further. And I'll use some emerald green, just wiping my brush. And then if I mix them together, you'll have a gorgeous dark color in the middle. Sometimes it goes more into the violet, sometimes it goes more towards bluish gray. Okay, depends what emerald green and red you'll have. Now it looks quite black here, so what I'll do, I'll just add a dab of white to it just to see what it looks like. Mine is more or less perfect gray here. So by adding white, we see what's happening to it. So if I'll start adding dab of more green to this gray with some white, we'll start seeing how it's changing towards the green. That's our opposite colors effect. But red, crimson, and emerald green give us fantastic dark color, naturally mixing on the painting as we use them. And then if I'll use a bit of red mixing with this gray as well. Now you can just watch me doing it. You don't have to quite doing it perfectly here. And a little bit more extra red at the edge with some white. So I can see the potential of some of these colors, and especially the darks, kind of the in-between zones where we have a little bit of red and a bit of green, some of that quality of color. Okay. And where we can have a dab of green and red, and we have another color on the other side of it. So my dark red and green, I'm just going to bring it back. Otherwise, I used it all. Okay, here we go. So we can use it with violets, we can use it with all the warm colors. It's kind of brings the whole darks together very, very quickly without us thinking too much. So you might not even need some Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray sometimes is good if you want to do a chunk of a line or something quite quickly without mixing colors. So that's already there. Right, so that's our colors. Let me put this screen back. Oops. Okay, let's do that one back as well. Okay, I'm gonna put my image below. I'll leave this one's here for the moment. And let's start with sketching our composition. No, while we've got a clean surface, let's do some practice with the sponge. Okay, let me put this one aside. So I have some white board, and I've got a bit of a spare gray board, just a few offcuts. Right, let's move this one across then. Right, so to use a sponge, some of you might have used it with me with the watercolors and with acrylic. Might have not used it with an oil painting yet. So same principle, but obviously it will get quite murky quite quickly. And if we have quite a lot of water for acrylics and watercolors, we can rinse it very well. We're not going to have quite a lot of that rinsing today with a sponge, so be careful. Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a separate palette here, which I can choose or change later on, so you can see things more on the screen. Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to dip my sponge in quite a lot of tubes or oil, whichever you might have in front of you. Tubes might be easier because it's a little bit cheaper and more easier to dip your sponge into. Now, gloves might be essential because of that process. Right, and what I want to do, I want to use a little bit of warm color. So I'm going to start with some ochre and white, and let's say a dab of cadmium orange. Tiny bit more oil for me. And I'm interested to maybe sketch some of the shapes of my trees with sponge. Yeah. Maybe use a little bit more liquid to have some soft strokes. If I've got a sharp stroke, can I add a bit more liquid and make it runnier? Can I press on a sponge? If I've got a sharp edge, this is quite nice. Doing some tree trunks. Okay. Now, sponge shouldn't be runny, but if you want to have soft areas, we might need more tabs. And then I'm going to start adding a tiny bit more extra color. So let's say some red. Yeah, or maybe just do a quick sketch for the bank for us. Yeah, I'm just looking for what type of strokes I can do if I were to paint a tree. How easy or difficult it's to apply some of these colors. We're just using a bit of green and cadmium red together. That will be quite good. Now we're painting on the white, so it's easier for you to see the colors. But I'm painting on the white just for you to see it. But when we start using our dark background, that will be quite exciting to see what's happening to the strokes there as well. So that's quite, yeah, so we can see same color, a bit of more red, a bit more green. So that's when I was talking about mixing them together. That's my path. So this is just to play and explore a little. Okay. So the sponge is for applying very quick colors and smudging them. So for example, if I want to have some of my paths much lighter, I'll just have a little bit more dabs on the sponge and I can just lift things. Obviously, the more you persevere, the more you press, the more you'll lift. So if I were to go and paint, let's say for the white background, if I'll just paint everything dark, so I know my sky needs to be lighter, but if I want to create some fog, okay, and then I'll go and lift some of these mucky strokes. I start to have already quite atmospheric painting, because I can lift it in some places much more stronger. I'm more interested into that soft feel of kind of change between one color to another. I'm more interested into those strokes than anything else from the sponge, where we can lift it. If you wanted to try using a kitchen roll, it's not the same. It's a little bit, well, not runny enough. It's not wet enough. It's something is not quite give you the same wonderful softness effects. If it doesn't lift well, it means that your sponge is full of muck, or you might need to wash it, or you might want to turn it the other side and use a cleaner edge. Okay, so those are the lovely soft shapes we're interested in today. And then we can, of course, add more color to it or do all sorts of things. But the quality of the line as our background is quite exciting.
Julia,
Can
I just ask you, while you were doing the initial colouring with your sponge, did you keep it on the same side, or were you turning constantly?
No, if I'm applying one color or a couple of colors, I'm more or less, yes, holding the sponge the same way. It's only when I started lifting and I need more cleaner edges on a sponge, that's when I start turning it. But otherwise, no, you don't have to.
Right, thank you.
Okay. So now you don't have to do this. I'm more interested for you practicing the strokes, but just to give you an idea of what's going to be happening afterwards for us here. Yeah, how we can build things up. The darknesses will come in, but that softness of the foggy landscape is already there. And if I've done anything too sharp with my brush, that could be softened as well very easily, kind of persuaded to be appearing and softening elsewhere. Okay, so this is what we're looking for. Now this is with white, so this was a white background. Now some of you might not have a darker background because I've forgotten to tell you, but I have, okay, I've got something here as well. But I have my darker background just to show you if we can't lift color to keep it light, we can apply it with a sponge. So by using the colors we were mixing, for example, white and crimson and violet, I've got some left here. And I can paint those lovely soft areas. By leaving some of the silhouettes of the trees. Okay, and this light color could be softened into the grays. Yeah, well, softened into the background by just adding more paint. So in a way, we're reversing. Instead of lifting it where we want it light, we're lifting it where we want it preserved our background color. So maybe some of these is going to be left out silhouettes of my trees. And then we can work with the same, again, lighter, darker colors, range of colors. So violet to crimson color today should help us out as we'll start sponging it, sponging our colors through the piece. So just working with a sponge becomes very exciting when you press on a sponge, as you lift it, as you smudge, as you drag. So if I'm applying it with a brush, now it doesn't have to be all done with a sponge. And if you're struggling with it, struggling to have maybe softer, pointy, using the pointy edge of it, don't be scared of applying wider strokes and then just cleaning things up, or apply strokes with a brush and then just smudging some of them. This is really exciting. Look at those tree trunks. They're becoming very free. Yeah, and look how it's disappearing into the fog. So combination of sponge and brush is important for today. There might be another tree next to it, so I'm working with that grayish tone here. Okay, so you've got your autumn view, winter view very quickly. And then all you just need to do is just work out some details. But the atmosphere of it is there. Okay. Right, so that's a playful time. We can do at any point, just to pick up some paper or board, or if you've got any left out pieces, I keep them all just in case in one piece of work I'll need to practice something. And let's have a look at our painting now. Let's put this aside. Let's put this one aside. Now I made my board a tiny bit mucky, but it doesn't matter because we're going to be working through it. And we're going to start with a sketch of our composition. I'm going to leave my sponge in my tubs. I can wash it later. Another option is for you to have a number of sponges. So one could have warm colors, one could have cool colors, and one could have more of a cleaner edges, so then you can use it as you go. Right, so I'm going to use cadmium red and emerald green for my sketching colors. And I'm going to work out the layout. So if I were to divide my work into half, maybe tiny bit, yeah, probably into half, I'm going to have the back of the road where the trees, well, the road's kind of right at the back there. So where the trees coming together on the ground, but that might be a little bit lower. So I'm interested in creating that arch area here, that lovely little space. I'm going to start with that. I'm going to work these roughly these shapes of the trees first to know how much space I've got left. Always was fascinated how those spaces been created, how nature produced those lovely arch spaces, and how the road stays so naturally clear. And then I saw the tractors cleaning them all and cutting them all. And I was a bit disappointed, but okay. So I know that those now, these trees are going to be roughly somewhere here. We can come back to them. But that gives us enough space for the road, enough space for the sky, and then we can decide if they need to be moved left or right. Okay, now I can do my road. Okay, so one line is going quite shallowish one way, and then it probably just goes that way. And then the other side widens, widens. And if we divide our front width of the painting into half, and then probably another half, so it's a quarter. So that's roughly is going to be into that line of a quarter. That road will be getting narrow at the back. Now, because we have a lot of tubes or oils, whichever, both, it will be extra smelly because the surface of the tubes is wider than now a normal narrower pot. So be careful, you might get a bit of a headache at the end of the class. So when you can, maybe just close it. Yeah, like that. So it's not evaporating right into our faces. Okay, so that's going to be somewhere there. And the bank. So I'm straight away doing some of those banks. And this left-hand side, right-hand side bank. Again, if I divide my piece here into half, okay, maybe someone to half here. So it probably goes a third. Okay, so if I'll have 3 parts roughly here, it's probably going to go into a third. Okay. And then I want to play with my trees, the silhouettes of the trees. It's quite nice. I had totally different formats earlier on, and the layout was very different, quite like the elongated format of my gradeboard, which was just unplanned. So the directions, some of our trees here. Quite like to find out the widths of the branches possibly, because I think I can start slowly moving my edges if they need it. I think the tree here could be a tiny bit lower. This lower tree, we've got that's almost like a diagonal oval. Again, how the farmer cuts it, so the tree from a more symmetrical shape, like this one, which will have much more symmetrical shape because it's taller now and doesn't get cut in the areas below. Yeah, it's almost kind of like that there. And this one will have slightly narrower, sorry, slightly abrupt edge. Now you might see too many lines for me here. It might be getting a little confusing. once we'll start applying some tones, we'll see that better. Right, so that's actually, that road is going away. It's like a little junction here, but the actual road is continuing. That makes sense. That's it. This could be some here. This middle section of the road. Okay. Right, I'm going to start with placing some of the medium tones. I want to work into some of the background trees and some of the just basic shapes of the banks here, okay? And then I'll bring in some the sky, the light, the foggy highlights. So let's go for just really simplified colors. Now we were looking at mixing crimson and violet and having different variations of them, okay? So crimson and violet and some white, and then later on with a brush or maybe a sponge later on, we'll bring some of the warmer colors on top. So that's our first color. And then we can use any of these crimson and ochres for the sides, for the banks. Okay. So first of all, it's crimson, some white, so a little bit of taupe. So we want it runny, but not, oh, gone in the wrong color. Crimson, white, violet. Now that's going to be a little bit too similar to what we just had as a background. So just make it slightly different to whatever the background you have. So if I've got more red, I'm going to mix slightly more violet color. If you have more violet color, mix a little bit more red. So have that variety present. Okay, let's do that. So tiny bit more violet maybe for me. I can do the darks later on as well. Okay, so I want to keep things a bit more pinkish. Okay, I think this one might need a bit more orangey, so a bit more cadmium red, a bit more ochre. I think. Oh, that's what I want. So I want to do the trees. Okay, gone for the banks. Okay, I was mixing it for the trees, gone for the banks. That's okay. Thought I was doing something wrong. That's why I needed it much lighter. Okay. Right, so the banks are here. I'll come back to the trees afterwards. Don't be scared that some of your colors might be a little bit light. Might exaggerate some lights here. So they will remain here for later when the darks will come in. I'll do some of that red here as well. Sorry, orangey, copperish color. And then okay, I'm going to be back to my violety lighter tone, cadmium red and sorry, cadmium crimson and violet. Sorry, folks. So it's going to be light, but plenty of darks before the highlights of the fog will come in. They're immediately starting to look like there's a shape together. Okay. And now I'm happy to rinse my sponge away from the pinks, or as much away from the pinks as I can. And I'm gonna go for a cooler color. That's where you can have a different sponge if you wanted to, if you have one spare. Just drying it so it's not too runny on my paper towel. Right, I'm gonna go for bluey gray, or it could be just white, ultramarine, and a tiny dab of black or Payne's gray. I'll be using bluey gray with extra whites later. So let's find some spaces of light. And now don't worry about the gaps between the branches of these groups of trees, just ignore that. Maybe a little archway left. All the rest could be just a silhouette. Here we can have thicker paint, and where you will use it thicker, the lighter it will appear. And when you start diluting it, smudging it, it will become much more darker. So I'm going to leave some of these branches here. I love leaving the pinks in between as a background. And when I'm happy with most of the placements of that light tone, I'm going to add a bit more softer edges. So I'm just rinsing my sponge from the thicker paint. Oh, you're gonna love me for the sponge use today. It's paint everywhere. Right, I'm gonna soften some of these edges where the trees could be more foggy, or some of the the evenness of that light tone doesn't have to be perfect. We can lift some of it and we'll see some of the pink underneath, or that could be introduced as a more runnier strokes, and we'll just see what's going to happen, how they're going to start run. Some of the branches could be done with a wet stroke. The corner of the sponge. Any versions or any options, yeah. What you find useful is great. If it's too much and you're losing control, that you will be losing control, but to a certain extent. So you can always help yourself with a brush. Okay, I don't want to have too sharp edges here, so maybe soften those ones. The colors are merging together as well a little as I'm smudging and softening. Part of the background shows, part of the that's quite nice. I like that. And in our painting, we're not always, not just this one, but generally in painting, we can use this approach in some of the strokes. Maybe if we need to work out the softness, all we need to do is to pick up a sponge and do a couple of gentle lifts or gentle merges. Okay, I quite like that. Right, so some darker tones with a sponge. Right, if I've got a mucky edge, I might need to wash the sponge, or I can just work. I think that's a little bit too light. Or I could work with another edge of it. Right, I want my cadmium red, and I want emerald green. Okay, and I want it quite runny, so we can see maybe some of the nice textures we can work with. So if I start with the top, if I play with my sponge and do some dabs and strokes, interpreting and imitating some of the leaves left as the silhouettes on the top, just need to make sure they don't look all the same. Okay, and it also keeps it a bit more transparent, a little bit more alive. Okay, some of these ones could be done with a brush, but I just want to give it a go with a sponge. Might be too much with a sponge because they become too heavy. Maybe I can do the same liquidy runny strokes. Right, but mainly I wanted this darkness in the playful spongy strokes. Here, yeah, okay.
I'm mixing cadmium orange with
crimson and emerald green. Cadmium orange will be okay. Crimson will be giving you more transparent colors. Cadmium orange or red will have some white in it, like our ochre. So it will not give you dark enough pigments when you start mixing it, yeah?
It's giving me a dark green, actually.
Yeah, so. Yeah. So crimson.
Right.
Crimson and emerald green.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry if I can't remember what I said. Maybe sometimes I do make a mistake when I'm pronouncing my colors. And I'm picking up a little bit more red, a little bit more green for different parts here. And now if we're doing something small, it doesn't have to be done with a sponge. Leave it out and do it with a brush later if it's too much. I haven't had any white on my sponge for these two colors to keep it quite dark. Now for the road, I'm just going to dilute this color with a bit of turbs and just let it stay quite transparent. So my application of paint is not overly runny. We painted in the past with quite runny oil, so this one doesn't have to be. But you can play on the texture of the stroke. So if you're doing a bigger stroke, you'll have much more plainer area. If you double dribble with the strokes, yeah, you'll have much more texture left, like I left it for the leaves, or much more plain areas for the road. Kind of more of a sweeping strokes. So they're already creating that edge. Now I quite like the tree trunks using a sponge, so I might just introduce some of them and just see if that's going to be any good. Might not be. No, maybe I'll do it with a brush here. Okay, anything else dark? I might do a tiny bit more darker bases here for the trees. Tree trunks don't have to be done in sponge. I'm messing about. Okay, I'm happy with that. So now sponge is washed or left where it is, and we're gonna leave the sponge alone for now, unless if you'll have a sharp edge somewhere which we might not want, we can use that, soften it, but all the rest I'm going to put it aside now. Just bring my tree here a little bit lower to the ground and a bit softer here. Good, 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 good. Now, while I'm on my darks, I will continue with crimson and emerald green. I want to do my tree trunks, but with a brush now. That's again my provisional planning for them. If they will come out a little bit chunky or a little bit too much or too precise, we've got plenty of other things to do, so we can work on them. We can repaint them if you like them. Fantastic. We can just avoid touching them. But I like the stage when we practice them almost, yeah, and it gives us a number of stages to come back to those trees, a bit more elegant, and keep building them up if they didn't happen first time around. don't like something, we can wipe it off with a sponge, with a finger. And tiny bit more branches for my foreground trees. Keep creating a lovely character for them. So the more spontaneous you work within those lines, if you have a bit more red on the brush or a little bit more green, doesn't have to be always perfect in between color or tone. The opposite, sometimes it's best when it's has different darknesses and different colors. Okay, I'm looking for some of my branches which look too parallel. Something for me to consider. We can make them branches on trees close to us slightly wider towards their base. So the tree trunks also appear a little bit wider at the top for the two big trees because of the vine around them. So that fluffiness of the surface for the perimeter of these trees will be the vine thickening them. And just enjoy the runniness of the paint. Enjoy, explore some of that very funky. I do like playing with branches with this technique because you have so much safety here. If things go wrong, you can just simply paint over it as part of the background. Okay, I've got some character there. So we've done our medium tones. We've done the highlights for the sky. We've done the darks for the banks, the road, and the tree trunks. And now we can come back with some of our medium tones again, and now start putting a bit more precise color. So I'll use slightly larger brush here. Well, probably a combination of my smaller one, and I'm going to change my palette to have some fresh space here. Right, so now we're going to start introducing some thicker paints and work out the details. Now the painting is almost finished. We can keep it as sketching as we want. We can work into more and more details. So it's up to us now how detailed we want to keep it, and how foggy and how wild, suggestive we can keep it. Yeah. So I'm going to start with some lovely orangey colors on the sides of the road, and I'm going to start working, introducing other colors for the foliage, for the trees at the back, maybe leaves at the trees at the front, and road, and so on and so forth. Right, so let's get started with some white, some ochre, and some cadmium orange. If we want to add a little bit of yellow to it as well to make the color sing a bit more. Now we have got a lot of darks on our painting already, so don't be scared of using some bold, fresh colors. There will be between the darks here, and it doesn't have to be the lighter colors, it doesn't have to be between darks, but it will be in between those merged colors already. So we have a little edge of this border, so maybe I can make that one slightly lighter. Again, how the farmer might be cutting it, and maybe I'll have slightly darker version. So I'm adding more cadmium red or cadmium orange, whichever that is, whichever you might have. Maybe dark mauve. Dab more of the ochre. So some dots about. Now tempting to do quite a lot, but just be careful. Depends how light your color is. The further away, we need to do a bit more smaller strokes or more simplified strokes, so they shouldn't have too much texture. The closer they will be to us, we can then introduce some more individual or more precise. I quite like this lovely light. And might just put it like peeping behind some of these areas at the front. Because turbs on the base quite strong, the color will be a little bit similar to some of the techniques we tried when we painted on top of the oiled wet surface. Okay, I might just do a tiny bit more of that color at the back here. Okay, and maybe stop. Nice fiery color. I'll just do it a little bit more cleaner here. I quite like these nice fiery strokes. Now I'm going to go for some more crimson mixed with this color. Okay, I'm running out of my crimson, so I can add that. So I want a darker version of it, so I can use more ochre and crimson now. And we can add a little bit more of a darker tone of the coppery. That's lovely and reddish. Beautiful. So we're still preserving some of those darks, but they're kind of mingled in between. Okay, a slightly larger stroke somewhere here for me. And that's when you can be creative and really playful. I also put a little bit of leaves on the road. For that, any of those colors, maybe the darker options will be better. And also I'll start from almost horizontal lines to show that's the surface of the road. So from the surface of the being on the trees, being on the bushes. And that might be quite a lot of leaves here. I might just simplify when they start having loads of borders, so they stop looking like. At the moment, my leaves here look as loads of individual leaves. So if I simplify some of them, they will look as a group. Individual leaves are good, but maybe they're a little bit too early for me to do individual ones here. Just take too much attention. Takes too much attention from the trees themselves and their leaves there. Okay, it's a bit better. I lost some of my darks, but I can bring them back for now or later on. Just fixing what I've a little bit over worked with darkness. That's where the sponge could come in and lift some of that color. That I'm back to the original background color, which is really good here. Okay, so I need to be careful with this road. So leaves are there, but not too many. Okay, that's better. But unless if I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have known how much space I need there, how much more settled I might want to be. Lovely. Right, let's work down a bit more into the trees at the back. Now I want to introduce a little bit of warmth to them. So for that we used some white and some yellow and tiny bit of ochre with cadmium orange. I already got some of it mixed, so I'm just going to pick it up from my palette here. So I want to keep it a bit light, because that will be just a bit of that extra warmth. Okay, that's might be a little bit too strong, but if I'll wipe my brush gently and introduce the color a bit more softer, there'll be a bit of that light. Yeah, the tree becomes three-dimensional very quickly. Gonna have like groups of branches together or foliage. Okay, we can add a bit more grayish tones later as well. Grayish violets. Just do a little bit of that light here. Again, at any point, if the shapes are too abrupt, dab off tabs on a cleaner brush, on a clean brush, or just taking the most of the paint off your brush, but it doesn't have to be perfectly clean. So I'm using tabs, having tissue, just taking some of that paint off, and then using the clean tabs to soften some of the edges here. Because the highlights came out nice, but when they started moving further down, they became too much, too strong. Right, these lights, just checking the sizes so they're not all the same. It's almost like we've got a little bit of glance of mysterious warmth. Okay, let's stop at that. That's too much. And let's add a bit more darkness. I quite like some of the darkness at the bottom of those trees here. And that was our violet and crimson together with a bit of white. Again, we'll do the same to what we've just been doing, but at the base of these groups of darks, mainly underneath. I mainly wanted to do it for some of the areas where the tree trunks developing some extra darks. That's a bit too dark for me. So little sub nuances. Don't be scared if you covering some of the white background behind the trees. We can introduce it. We will be introducing it shortly. I'm thinking of the whole shape of that kind of the darkness of the arches, or the arch of the trees together. Kind of that majority of darks. We need to use a little bit of green with this violet and crimson. That will make it a tiny bit more darker as well. And I might use some of this color, same color, for some of the leaves for my trees at the front. I will place greener colors. If you remember, we're mixing some greens for these leaves. But while I have the darks, I think that's would be quite nice to add them to. Some of them could go over the tree trunk. It's going to be a busy area with the leaves. Okay, right. Anything else needs softening in our trees here where the dark's been? Again, using tabs or just fresher strokes. Right, when we played enough with the warm colors, well, let's mix up some warm greens. I want to say, well, let's go to the cool colors, but they're actually warmer versions of greens. So we had some ochre and we had some ultramarine. Maybe a dab of white if it comes out too dark. Now these combinations of ochre and ultramarine could be more towards blue, and some strokes could be more towards ochre. And now mix this color, but I think I'm going to use a smaller brush to apply it. So my leaves, where I place some of these gray colors, I'm just going to go on top of some of them. Okay, they appear a little bit lighter. Maybe that's why I need to have a darker version of it. I don't want them to get lost. I want them to stand out as a silhouette. So if they're getting lost, it means the color is too light. Although we will be adding a bit more highlights at the back, bit behind those leaves. So maybe we can do a little bit of leaves and then a little bit of background and then evaluate. Right now I'm going to have a bit more ochre here. So I'm going to try to paint them as a group. As a group, so they're not just too broken down. If I want to have them slightly darker, I can add all my paints gray or my cadmium red, no, crimson and emerald green, whichever is easier. Right, that's a bit too dark, so just a little bit more ochre here. Mix some sort of hacky-ish color. Oh, we also had cadmium red with it as well, actually, yes, to make it more orangey, and that's actually does keep it dark. That's it, yes, so we can have some cadmium red here as well. That's better. That's kind of autumny, very much autumnal color. So I'm going over my gray leaves, but also, well, some of the gray leaves, but also bring some new ones as well. If you look at the shapes of the leaves I've done so far, so I've got larger groups, smaller groups, individual ones, lighter ones, darker ones, more violety ones, more lighter greener, darker greener. So the variety is constantly there. Might do tiny bit of leaves close to some of these oranges as well, because everything is charged up quite red here. So to cool it off, put in a little bit of extra greens. Plus, I think the sponge marks for the leaves will be the best. So bringing back some of them. And also, if I wanted to bring some of the leaves further into the surface, now some of it might be reflecting, but we at some angles will recognize the slight variation in color. And now I will pick it. So it might be somewhere in a few places here. Same as at the back. Trees, I might just do it more simplified again as a shape rather than individual leaves. Okay, that's good. Let's cheered it up a bit. Made it a little bit more vibrant in color. Lovely. And now we can tidy up the whites, or the lights. So my plan is adding some more highlights in between the tree trunks, maybe in between some of the branches. Majority of it will stay as it is, but we just want to sharpen some corners. And after that, we'll put some extra glowing turquoisey greens, some blues behind the trees on the front. So we'll have a bit more glow of light. We've got extra more perspective there of the fog. Right, so I need to have a clean brush because I'm going to work for some light. Right, I have my grayish blue, and I will be using some white with it as well. So if I'll start with grayish blue, again, to remind you, if you don't have it, it's white mixed with ultramarine blue and a dab of gray, or dab of black. Okay, so what I'm going to go for quite a thick paint, and I'm going to find some key areas where I want to see more of a silhouette. So for example, the edge of the road could have just a tiny bit more definition here at the back. Okay, almost as happy dots. We can introduce few shapes or dots or little lines. Okay, so maybe here on the edge of the, and I'll be topping up my paint every stroke or every other stroke. So I'll keep it fresh. Right, let's do a little bit of spaces between the trees. Sometimes just doing a dot, if the surface contaminates and start being smudgy, just wash your brush, wipe your brush, or even persevere just kind of smudging that color into that area. You will have a nice subtone there first, and then we can introduce some fresher light. Okay, let's get maybe in between the branch and the tree trunk little gap. Sometimes it is hard to know where to put them. So just look for little gaps between the branches and tree trunks. Or even just look at my patterns and copy the patterns. In the rough places, you'll see, and it will give you an idea what to do. Okay, let's keep that one there. Maybe go for the edges of the trees. So if I've got a bold stroke here, then I can wipe my brush and soften out a layer. Okay, where we wanted to keep it soft. So at this stage, I'm going to do some extra thicker paint. And if I overdo it, I'll just bring my sponge or run here tabs on my brush. So don't be scared of going with a little bit more thicker paint. If we overwork certain areas, we can always come back with a darker tones back. So don't be scared. It's quite nice fogginess. Also, it's a perfect opportunity to tidy our tree trunks or the gaps between them. Ready to touch up the darks afterwards. So I introduced bolder light and I smudge it into the colors. So I have a combination of very bold light and a smudgy one. And sometimes I combine them both to have that glowing effect. Landscape Artist of the Year winner from last year, the lady who was painting the fire, she had loads of those techniques in her work of smudging the colors, bringing it back. Really playful approach. That's glowing now, that's lovely. At the same time, it's suggestive. And if you squint your eyes, we'll give you an opportunity to see where you might want to add more or when to stop. And that's what this technique is kind of aimed at, from softness of the sponge to an idea of what we could be doing with the rest. Soft, sharp, a bit more stronger, a bit more contrasty. Right, I'm going to bring some of my tree trunks back for the trees at the back, using my crimson and green. Just want to balance it a little bit more. This tree, maybe even a smaller brush for me. tiny bit longer here, and we'll start adding some mysterious blues. Some of my lovely in-between tones disappeared, so I need to bring them tiny bit back, smudge them back. Otherwise that mystery's disappearing. The top of the road could be slightly highlighted with a similar paler smudged grays. Okay. Maybe a little bit too much, so I can soften it with my fresh clean brush. Back to some of my dark tree trunks, and then back to some of my highlights. I think my earlier version was better. I should have stopped earlier with these highlights, but let's stop at that. Last more. Corner. That's what it is. Just getting it a little bit more in this corner. Maybe adding a tiny bit of whitish strokes here as well. When I get impatient, I start using a bit more wider strokes, and that's not always the best. Good. Good. If I wanted to have more scratches, oh, perfect. Scratching my branches will be a good idea here. How could I forget? Let's make it enough to do darker details and enough to have some darker silhouettes of the trees as well. Right, so the other bluey grays I wanted to put a little bit close to the kind of a little bit higher, not too close to the edge of this side of the undergrowth, but a little bit higher, maybe going for dab of white, a little bit lighter version of this. So it's a little, it's almost like a little belt going over this area. Or any other, maybe more solid, tiny bit more ultramarine. For the higher segments, where we might not want to keep all the pink, so I want to have some a little bit of extra dab. So we want the dazzling light between the leaves. It doesn't have to be bright white. No, don't want that. We want just a little bit of clear spaces, because we have put some blocky shapes of leaves, and maybe in some places we're a little bit overcrowded these areas. Okay, that's good. I quite like that light. Might put down a bit more wider white, whitish gray at the back. I quite like that. That's where my painting leads me to a new stage of development. Yeah, with a little bit of extra light when I started putting some dabs of it here. And I will soften this edge next to the tree. I want it to stay a bit more foggy-ish. The light is somewhere at the back, but it's okay, that's good. Right, and I wanted some bluish, lightish blue, so a bit more ultramarine and white. Then I wanted a little bit more turquoisey colors going down a bit more further into our leaves, more into the depths. So it shouldn't be any whites in there. Well, old light tone. So it's reasonably dark ultramarine with white. Just will cool off, almost like a glimpsing of bit of light coming through, cooling off some of our reds. Again, some dabs here and there. Maybe part on the tree trunk here. Okay, maybe this one is too much. I'll lift it off. And I want to do the same with slightly smaller scale, but a bit of turquoisey color. So adding a bit more emerald green to this blue with white. And just finding a few strokes of maybe on branches which are going over the trees. Maybe it will be tiny bit on touching on some of the leaves. Maybe it will be just a little, again, that light coming into the painting from the back. Just makes it a little bit more alive. The longer lines often give us an impression of the brambles. So that's quite nice. I like brambles. Okay, they appear very light here because of the reflection on the screen. And if there's anything else, that darker emerald green and blue on the path here, on the road, again, it just gives it the contrast color, the opposite color to the pinks and violets, and then we're done. So tiny bit of any hints of that light. That's lovely. I quite like it at the back there. Very fine. It just gives that's lovely as well. Just gives us that extra bit of light. I think that's better as well. Right, really exciting, really fresh, really moving, alive painting with loads of life in it. So that's our sponge work. That's our foggy development of the painting. I hope you had good fun and enjoy being messy there.